Okay, so today we're going to talk about fixing mistakes. Not that I ever make them.
Hit it!
For other people who make mistakes, you may want to know how to fix them so you can advise them on how to make their errors not as visible. And here's the thing about mistakes. You know, honestly, we all make them. And you've probably heard the saying that a good woodworker, the sign of a good woodworker is his ability or her ability to fix mistakes. It's not that you don't make them, you just know how to fix them so that people don't see them. There are times where you have to have a do-over. There are some mulligans in woodworking. But I would say about 99% of the mistakes that happen are fixable and repairable to a level that your client or whoever you're giving it to, they will never even see it. So if you're going to repair mistakes, there are a couple things that you're going to need. Your best friends. Number one, CA glue. Cyanoacrylate glue, super glue, whatever you want to call it. And then also, this is essential, super glue does dry quickly, but not as fast as I want it to, and I use a quick set activator. And most of these come with, if you buy one brand of the glue, you usually have the same brand that they sell a aerosol activator, and that allows the glue to cure up immediately. So if you're holding a small piece in place, little dab will do you, spray the activator on there, and then it's just immediately dry, right? CA glue is essential. A good quality filler. Timbermate is my favorite brand of filler. Very effective, doesn't shrink, comes in a lot of good colors, and those colors are a fantastic match for the woods that they're supposed to match. You'll also want an iron.
Where did you get that?
The store. Let's say you're routing a workpiece and you get a little bit of tear out in the middle of the workpiece, right? So as you're going along, you just hear that sort of sound that no woodworker likes to hear, is that as you're routing. So that means you lost a big chunk. If you can save the chunk, great, because you're going to use it. We'll do that in a little bit. If you can't save the chunk, sometimes the only thing that makes sense is to use a filler, right? And that's the example that I've got here. Take a look at this piece. So we actually have two, and I know this is maple, so it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to see, but where my finger is here, that's one that's got the filler placed in it already. Right? So we'll use that in a second to fast forward. But right here, you may not be able to see that too well, but there's a gouge. Pretty good sized gouge. So what I'm going to do is use Timbermate, maple, beech, and pine flavor. Pop that lid off. This is water-based, by the way. And as it dries up, how many times have you bought a thing of filler and you go to open it up and it's completely cured? Right? What a pain in the butt. This stuff is water-based, so if you do that and it's cured because the water evaporated, spray some water in there, put the lid on, come back in an hour, and it's usable again. Right? So all I'm going to do is grab a little bit of this good stuff here. Okay, there's my gouge. Put that right in there. Now later we're going to look at a similar gouge like this and do a wood repair, but right now I just want to focus on filler. Now I don't use filler all that often, but there are just times where it really is the most sensible solution. All right, so you want to overfill, of course, like that. Make sure there's enough in there and then let it dry. It's water-based, does dry fast, but not fast enough for a demo. So let's look at the one that's already filled. So I'm just going to sand it back. If you look at the color match here, this is what I love about Timbermate. Now we're zoomed in. Obviously, that's going to be a lot more noticeable when you're zoomed in like this. But once it's finished, this stuff does take stain. And you pull back and you look at this whole leg. As a whole, you're not really going to see that. And I wish I had the right colored pencil for this. But I've done this in the past. One of the things that makes filler not look so good is the fact that it matches the background wood, which it does pretty well here. What it doesn't do is it doesn't give us those fine grain lines that run through it. So if it's a really big flaw, like this probably isn't that big of a deal, but if it was a larger surface area, if you get a colored pencil that's closely matched to the color of the grain lines, you can actually trace those grain lines in. Now, I'll tell you what, this is a colored pencil I stole from my son's playroom. It's not the right color, but if you go to the craft store, you could pick up some really, try to get one that's as soft as possible and get them in a range of browns, right? And then basically look at where the grain starts and stops, and you can actually try to carry that grain line through however looks natural. And believe it or not, again, not the right color. So it stands out a little more than I would want it to. But if you pull back and look at that, that actually will help disguise this and make it look like real wood. The key though is you got to quickly put a fast drying finish on that, or the pencil will just kind of wipe off. So a little bit of shellac or lacquer probably isn't a bad idea for something to seal that color in. How about a misplaced mortise? Has that ever happened? It's never happened to me, but I've heard it happens to people. So the key with something like this is to simply fill it, right? You've got a hole, you need to fill it. The problem is a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, well, all right, let me cut a little piece, because you would have had a tenon going in there, so let me cut the tenon and put the grain running this way. The problem is if you do that, you're gonna have end grain showing here, so it's going to be a lot more noticeable than if you do a long grain joint. So I just basically cut some scrap, sized it down so that it would fit nice and snug, and then I also taper the ends. A lot of people may have trouble getting this piece cut perfectly so there's no gaps. Don't worry about cutting it perfectly. Cut it about a 1/16 of an inch oversized, grab a piece of sandpaper, and just give yourself a little angle on both sides, a little bit of a taper. And that's gonna allow me to coat this sucker with glue. Doing this very quickly, a little rushed. Like a this. Of course, you'd want glue in the mortise as well, right? Put it in. And because you have those ends tapered, as I hammer this down, it's going to take up the slack on the outside edges. And this really is just a superficial repair, right? It's not a structural thing. So as long as I don't see gaps, I'll be happy. Right, so you would let the glue dry on that, and then you would just plane it flush with the surface. There's one that I've already done. It's in place. Probably wasn't as careful with it as I should have been. So I'm just gonna grab a block plane and just clean that up a little bit. Okay. And that is a pretty acceptable repair, in my opinion. In fact, if you didn't know that I did that and you just looked at that piece, you probably wouldn't know that it even happened. So now if my mortise is in the wrong spot, I could relocate my mortise. Even if part of the new mortise, a lot of times that is what happens, you're just a little bit offset. So your new mortise will go into part of this repair. That's fine. It's solid wood. It's going in the same direction as the rest of our leg. If we route into it, there won't be any associated problems with it, right? So that's a great way to fix your misplaced mortises. Let's say you got a little bit of chip out. Maybe you're doing some edge routing, and I got a piece of tape here just because I didn't want to lose the piece. Here's the thing, whenever you have chip out, if you can recover the piece, and a lot of times you'll be on your knees with a magnifying glass looking for it, because finding the chipped out piece saves you a ton of time and effort because that piece is already perfectly cut to fill the void of the chip out. Right now, just so you know, this I created with a chisel, so I gouged in here and then flaked it out, right? So it's not exactly the same thing you would see, but you get the idea. This is a good use for CA glue. But if you look real close here, whoopsie, that is a dead-on match for the fit, right? And that's why you want to find this piece if you can. So let's put a little bit of CA glue on there. By the way, CA glue comes in a couple different viscosities, different thicknesses. I like medium and gel for error repairs. Occasionally I do have a calling to use, the thin stuff, but man, is that stuff watery. Not great for repairs, in my opinion. Okay, so I could just put this guy in place if I want to, like this. Now, a lot of people will put the activator on the other end. I don't want to do that because I want to make sure this gets a lot of pressure, the glue gets distributed, and then I can use my activator. Okay, so I'll use something like, little putty knife like this, put some diagonal pressure down, and just hit it with a little bit of the activator. Now you'll definitely have a little bit of squeeze out to contend with, but that can easily be sanded or chiseled away. Normally I'd give it a couple more minutes to cure up, but you would sand it nice and smooth. So look at that.
Uh-oh.
It's a repair on top of a repair. Let's pretend that didn't happen. Can we do that? Give it a little sanding. All right, so there will be no visible line when it's all said and done. because it's, lock and key. It fits in perfectly. There are times where you're not going to recover this piece. You can't find it. That is what this example represents here. Right at the corner, just nothing really you could do about it, right? Popped right out, now you're cursing. You're very upset. So sometimes in order to fix a mistake, you actually have to make the problem worse. So what I'm gonna try to do is actually turn this into a surface that I can work with. Right now it's useless to me, but I wanna take a piece of scrap and glue it in place, and I need a nice flat area to do that. So you can do it with a chisel, or you can use a plane, and I'm not left-handed, so this may not go so well. And once you have a nice flat surface, we now have something we can work with by taking another piece like this. Now, you may use yellow glue if you have a way to clamp this securely, but once again, CA glue is my hero. For this one, you know what? I'm gonna put the glue on the workpiece, okay? A little bit of glue on the workpiece, quick set activator. Spread it around a little bit. You only have a couple of seconds. That's good. Now this is just a big old chunk of scrap I had laying around. You probably would want to size this down to be a little bit more appropriately sized for this, because now I've got a lot of material to remove, and that becomes a lot of work. But I typically, with a smaller piece, could then come back to this. I may very well knock this off.
I was gonna say.
And that's why you don't have as much material here. If it's a smaller piece, you don't have as much to work, and you could just kind of pare away with a chisel or take light passes with a plane. But I don't know, let's see what happens. If it comes off, it comes off. Just understand why. Notice how well that's holding just with that CA glue, right? And that's why you could be a little more confident in a repair like this that it's gonna be fine. Really? You want me to go?
I want to see it.
Oh, Nicole wants to see it. I better go then. Let's keep going. I was trying to stop while I was ahead here.
I want to see it.
Not the best match in terms of the grain, but for a quick job, it's not too bad. And of course, we'd use a saw to trim off the edge here. Right? Altogether, though, we made the problem worse to allow us to put a nice patch in. And the results aren't too bad. A lot of times, you drop a workpiece, right? That can happen. Or you drop something on it like, oh my gosh, I dented my workpiece. Here's the great thing about a dent. A dent is nothing more than compressed fibers. Unless the dent is so severe, like that, where you've actually separated fibers, you can actually get most of this to spring back because you've effectively just crushed fibers. So we need to do something that brings some life back, helps those fibers spread apart a little bit. Right, so I've got a light dent here, 2 side-by-side dents here, and a really severe dent that I don't think is gonna repair very well. These will probably be more visible with water. Where's the other one? I can barely see it myself right there. All right, so I'm letting a little bit of water sit on there while I prep a blue shop towel or some kind of a washcloth. Whatever you have is fine, just something absorbent that you can soak with water. What we're gonna do is steam the dents. Now, we know that wood expands with moisture, right? And it can expand quickly if it's hot moisture, also known as steam. So if we can very carefully steam these dented areas, we may be able to get the wood fibers to spread out and fill up that gap, and the dent goes away. So let's do just that. I'm gonna focus on some of these bigger ones here. I'm trying to remember where they all are. Sometimes, by the way, the water, it's like straight from Trenton right there. The water will, in and of itself, cause expansion, even without the heat. So you may have trouble finding them because they've already expanded, but there's a good one right there. Let's steam that bad boy. Now, if your board is really thin, you have to be careful. Too much moisture, too much heat, you can actually cause a little bit of warping to occur. But usually on a big solid piece, you're okay. Now, you can also be a little bit more careful than I am. I'm being very messy with this by using the pinpoint tip of the iron and just kind of focusing in your flawed area. It's not a bad idea, but for the sake of a demo, I'm just kind of being sloppy. What are you doing, honey? Ironing my wood. You can see we still have that really severe dent right here. It's a little bit better, but like I said, crushed fibers are one thing. Fibers that actually get severed because it was such a deep impact, that's going to be a problem, right? And that's going to be hard, if not impossible, to use the steaming method to get out. But you can certainly make it less of a big deal. Here, I've got a little bit left on this guy. I don't know if you can really make that out.
Can't even... Oh, yeah, there it is.
This is also a pretty rough board. So there's a little bit of material left right there that I didn't get it to reform. Maybe a hair here, just a little bit, barely detectable. And I had a spot that was over here, fairly light dent, that I can't even find anymore. So all of these, with a little bit of sanding, so 3 light duty dents gone. This one, on the other hand, you can see as the wood fibers or the sanded dust fills that up, it's a little bit too deep, right? But we can make it look a little bit better. So this is a technique that I would use for light duty dents, not really heavy stuff. You can also use this steaming technique on plywood if you need to. And plywood, a lot of times, even if it's a nice looking surface, just dragging it around the tools in the shop or your workbench in the shop can put these little hairline scratches on there. And sometimes before I sand, if it's noticeable enough, before I give it my final sanding, because you don't want to sand plywood very aggressively, right? A lot of times what you can do is do a little bit of this steam treatment on any noticeable scratches. Let the fibers in that top layer veneer puff up a little bit. They'll get very rough, and then you can do your final sanding, and a lot of times that final sanding is a lot quicker and easier, and those mistakes or those little flaws just go away. Don't be too aggressive about it on plywood because you don't want to like reactivate the glue in the veneer layer. You don't want to warp the plywood. You got to be careful with it. But for very noticeable surface flaws, you can spot treat them and actually get a decent result. Now, one thing I'll address, a lot of people, when they talk about repairs, fixing repairs, they'll talk about glue and wood dust. Right? Take the dust of whatever wood you're working with, get a little bit of CA glue or epoxy, mix it together, and that can be a sufficient repair. That can work in some instances, but I don't really like it as a finish. The reason is because this type of material, whoops, I'm gonna turn off my compressor. It's a real shot, people.
We're live.
Yeah, doing real woodworking here.
You're talking about the CA glue and
Oh yeah,
slurry.
yeah, okay. So the problem that I have with that is CA glue, epoxy, even Titebond, these things don't accept stains. So even when you put on a clear finish still imparts a color change to the wood. So if you've repaired a certain area, then you hit it with finish, or worse yet, an actual stain, a lot of times it becomes an eyesore. Even if you have the wood fibers mixed with it, they're not absorbed, they're just wood fibers in a liquid suspension now. And even with epoxy, a lot of times you look really close at epoxy that's been mixed with sawdust, look really close at it, it just looks like sawdust suspended in resin, right? So you have to be careful about how and when you use that. Knots are a different story because you could put a little dye in an epoxy mix and you could fill a knot. And a lot of times knots are so darkly colored that if you use a clear material to fill a little flaw, it actually will be hard to see, right? Because it's just showing the dark color beneath it. But hopefully that prepares you for any mistakes, common mistakes you might confront. And maybe in the future, like I said, we'll do an updated version based on feedback. How do you repair this? How do you repair that? But this should get you going for some really basic repairs.